Good morning, everybody. I am Wendy Smith. I am a professor at Lerner College and the academic director of the University of Delaware's Women's Leadership Initiative. And I'm thrilled to be here on our second in the Leadership in Times of Crisis webinar series. When we started the series, we had no idea of how big it would be. And we now have over 700 people signed up. So I wanted to just say thank you to all of you for joining us, for being part of this community, being part of this conversation, and joining us this morning. I also wanted to just pause with a quick thank you to our team in the background. In the last couple of weeks, we have really worked to be able to accommodate a broader group of people and have a bit more control over the webinar. So thank you to our team for really managing that. We started this series really asking the question of what the community of people that we've been in touch with could value, could really use at this moment. And two things emerged for us. The first was that we are all looking for some aspiration, for some hope and community and connection at a moment that we are all facing pretty significant challenges. And the second is that we're looking for just really tactically very specific strategies of how to navigate in this real new normal. And so this series emerged as a response to that, and I am thrilled with some fantastic presenters that we have both today, which I'll introduce in a minute, and then coming up more broadly. So on the screen right now, you could see both today's session, the next 4 that we have coming up. You can also see that our previous session that we did 2 weeks ago is now online if you missed it and want to go back and see it. And our team is having conversations about if and how to continue this conversation or this series. And so if you guys, if anyone out there has recommendations, thoughts, ideas about topics that are really resonant to you, please do reach out to us at the Women's Leadership Initiative. Just as a reminder, we are recording today's session. We have moved, as I said, to a new format. So we welcome all of your comments, or a new format than we were 2 weeks ago. And so we welcome all of your comments, your thoughts, your ideas in the Q&A. And if you have recommendations, please do put them there. We're very happy to share that. We'll capture the Q&A and we will send it out, and so that people can really be able to value the broader communal wisdom that we have. So please do feel free to share it. As I think about today's session, I was thinking about it, and a quote came to me from a CEO that I've been working with, a woman named Zita Cobb, who is the CEO of the Shorefast Foundation and runs the Fogo Island Inn. And she often quotes a poet, Glenn Calhoun from New Zealand, in a poem called The Art of Walking Upright. And the last stanza of that poem says, "The art of walking upright is the art of using both feet. One is for holding on, and the other is for letting go." And as I think about the topic this morning, really what our goal is, and what I know our speakers will address, is really how we both hold on and let go. And so with that, I want to introduce our speakers and turn it over to them. Golbie, we're thrilled to have you on. Golbie, I know you're calling in from California, so we're thrilled to have you on at 6 o'clock in the morning. Golbie is a people and culture advisor and the former chief people officer at an HR tech company, Culture Amp. Golbie has had various positions in investment and organizational development and roles in global investment at BlackRock, where she also founded the BlackRock meditation program that went out to nearly 1,500 people. And so I know, Golbie, that you'll have a chance to really tell us more about that. And Sarah Baker Andrus is the Assistant Director at the University of Delaware's Lerner College of Business and Economics, our career services. She has spent most of her career immersed in career issues, leading corporate recruitment and talent management efforts. In 2015, Golbie founded the Avara Careers, Golbie, I hope I'm saying that right, which is a coaching and consulting company dedicated to helping people find a greater career fit. She also teaches executive presence and problem solving. And Sarah, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I look forward to, hope you can add to that as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Golbie, and I look forward to the comments, the ideas and reactions in the Q&A. We'll turn it over to the two of you for a couple of minutes and then turn to some Q&A. So Golbie, it's all yours.
Fantastic. Thanks, Wendy. And Sarah, I think I got credit for some of your accomplishments. So those were actually Sarah's impressive accomplishments. I'm going to go ahead. Well, I'll talk to you now, actually, so you can see me. So I have lived and worked through a variety of national and global crises. I was at BlackRock during the global financial crisis, starting out there in the high yield real estate debt investing group, which is really where so much of the initial challenges began. I stayed at BlackRock for 8 years through that experience, through the crisis. And in 2013 started a meditation program, really at the request of many of my colleagues who are trying to figure out how to deal with the enduring stress that comes from not only just a challenging job, but also the aftermath of living and working through crisis. So my hope for today is to share what I've learned, both having gone through it and also helping other people go through it. Because though this crisis is different in so many important ways, there are some similarities. So with that, I'll share my screen. All right, Wendy, can you just make sure that everyone can see this? Can you let me know?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. So leadership in a time of crisis. All right, so I'm going to split my time really in 4 categories. One is just putting crisis in context. One is then talking about how do we lead ourselves in periods of crisis? How do we lead others? And then how do we lead organizations? Crisis in context. Okay, so let's just take a sense of what's happening in our external conditions right now, in our environment. There are some very challenging things happening. We have job loss and change, pay reductions, sickness of loved ones, death of loved ones. Depending on where you live, you might be hearing nonstop sirens. Most people, depending on what country and state you're in, are locked down. They might be in a small apartment. They might be with no child care. They have to homeschool their children. They have challenges. You can't travel. People, some of my friends that are of Chinese origin and heritage are experiencing racism and discrimination. Like, there are some very extreme external conditions going on. Now, I tend to think about things in crises in general along a spectrum, because some people at an extreme exposure level are maybe facing all of these things. Other of us might not be really facing them. They might be more concepts or more things on the news. And so it can help when we're placing our crisis in context to figure out where on the external condition spectrum do I fall. And some things might be a 10, some things might be a 0 or something in between, but it's a framework to start to understand how to relate to what's happening in our environment. Now, as much as things are happening in our external environment, there are also things happening in our internal environment, which means we have feelings and thoughts. And some of them are also extreme and negative. People have fear and denial. There's powerlessness. There's overwhelm, confusion, trauma. Some people are relieved and some people are bored. There's a range of feelings. Kind of everything arises, and many people are cycling through these feelings in any given day, let alone a week or over a course of a week. We also have thoughts, and some of those thoughts can be extreme as well. Will I get sick? Will my parents survive? And so just as there's a range in our exposure, the same thing is true for our internal conditions. For some of us, we might not necessarily be feeling these very extremely or at all. For others, these thoughts and feelings could be debilitating. And again, we just want to understand kind of what is the lay of the land out there and in here, because then that allows us to find a path through. We have to remember two arenas, internal and external. We need to remember that our experience of either will range from nothing almost to debilitating. And the way we tend to interact between the internal and the external is through our words, our actions, and our reactions. Because people can't see our thoughts and they can't see our feelings. They might think they can when they see our expressions, but it's really as we externalize that we kind of bridge the two. So what does that mean? How does that end to leading ourselves? Well, one of the most important things I think when dealing with the crisis, especially at work, is to figure out what your relationship with your role at work is. Some people live to work, others work to live, and some people are also in the middle. What I do tend to find in my experience, both personally and working alongside so many people that I got to hear their intimate and private stories, was that a lot of people merge themselves with their identity and their role. And so the reality is we as people are bigger than any role we play. I tend to think of roles as like outfits that you put on. When you go into a new company or a new system, as I always call it, you play a role, and that's a new role. It might be different from the outfit you put on in another company, and it doesn't necessarily define you. It's just how you show up. What happens, especially in moments of crisis or stress, is we sometimes forget that we are a whole and complete person outside of the role we play at work. So this is just a model. There's no right or wrong answer, but it's worth kind of starting to ask the question, what is my relationship to my work? Because that'll, again, start to create more context for you to figure out what's the right path for you through. Because again, the reality, if you disaggregate these, is you have needs as a human, and your role has needs. Your body, your mind, your heart, your soul, your relationships, your just general life maintenance needs time and attention. And your role will have expectations, responsibilities, commitments, decisions. It'll have resources you can use, and it'll have lots of constraints. And those, though these aren't mutually exclusive, we tend to, in my experience, people tend to neglect their needs as a human, especially in times of crisis. But even though work becomes all consuming, we cannot forget that the totality of our life and our experience is bigger than any role we play. And so it's now in this moment of uncertainty and crisis and chaos that we have to pause and proactively build habits that allow us as a human being to get through the duration of this, because it really is a long game. It is an endurance sport, and most people are, if they're like a number 10 on that internal conditions, they might be in survival mode. They might be in fight or flight. They might be reactive. They aren't necessarily, taking the time to go on a walk per se, because their nervous system might not allow them to. So the way we start to kind of build those habits is we simply experiment. We experiment with routines that will get us through massive amounts of change in the external conditions, but also anything of a roller coaster, what might become a roller coaster of our internal emotions. Similarly, we should look at our role and our responsibilities and get clear. What are my responsibilities in the short term, medium term, long term? What are the expectations of my role? Can I honor what I'm meant to do in this organizational system and what I need as a person that engages with friends and family? Again, here it's experimenting. There's no right answer with what you can do that allows you to fulfill your role. It might just be being clear about here are my roles and responsibilities, here's my boundaries. That also lets you kind of nurture yourself as a human being. On this slide, I put some micro actions you can take to nurture your body and mind and your heart and spirit. I would say that a lot of people, when the system around them is very complicated and complex, they think the solution needs to be complicated and complex, when in reality, sometimes the most simple things are the way in to working through complex situations. You experience this a lot with people who meditate, where it's so hard to center your mind on an object of concentration like your breath, for example. So people think they can't do it when that practice of just focusing on your breath is quite simple. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's simple. And we can start simply with micro actions. On the right, I also put a picture of some books that I shared this picture on LinkedIn. We are in a period where people are going through existential crisis on some level. They're contemplating their own mortality, other people's mortality. And sometimes you need more resource than just going to bed 20 minutes earlier. Your body might need that and appreciate it, but sometimes our mind needs to latch on to concepts and frameworks to help us navigate and make sense. So those are some of the books that have helped me in the past through various things I've experienced. If I'm going to recap, and you'll get all these slides. You know, self-care really is the foundation of self-leadership, because most people neglect their own self until they burn out. And, you know, to attend to all the things that your work might need from you, it's a recipe for really kind of forgetting who you are and getting all consumed by work. So again, you just want to separate those out, figure out what your relationship is, and tend to the part of you that is bigger than any role you might play. What's important is also to expect the unexpected in your external conditions and also your internal conditions. It might surprise you to wake up one day and feel rage. It might surprise you to not be able to get off the couch, but to create space for the unexpected so it's not as surprising and you almost can greet it as, oh, that's interesting. I feel rageful today. Okay, working with that. And again, in complex situations, don't overlook the simple. Simple's really good. Now we get to leading others. And again, all these topics are so much more complex. They could be their own hour-long conversation, but I'm trying to distill down some really key points that could be takeaways for you. So in organizational systems or in companies, we are part of an interconnected web. We all have a boss, that's for sure, certain. Even your CEO has a boss, it's the board of directors. We tend to all have peers. Not all of us have direct reports, but this is a call on leadership, so my guess is many of you do. Now remember that organizational system, and then remember all those internal conditions that I mentioned earlier, from 0 to 10, and multiply it. There is a soup of emotions and thoughts and probably some words and actions and reactions that aren't necessarily kind or thoughtful. They might be intense. It's a lot going on for a system. And so it's really important at this moment to remember that everybody's human and most people are doing their very best. You know, given the level of impact of the crisis on them, right? They might be at a 10 where all those things on the external conditions are hitting them hard. And they all have different abilities and resources to cope. Some people have money to get them through this period if they don't, if they end up losing their job, and some people don't. And that is a very different life reality. And I think we need to remember that under extreme stress, people make mistakes. They kind of act moody. They can do all sorts of stuff. We tend to, at least I can speak for myself, I can be impatient under massive stress. I think it's in this moment that we have to lean into how can I be more patient, more compassionate, more empathetic. Everyone's previous experience with crises will influence their actions and their decisions, their mindsets. If you've been through a personal or professional crisis, you might nail how to navigate this and navigate others. If this is your first time dealing with some extreme issues, you might be at a loss, and it would be worth getting resources to support you. I think the other important thing to remember is that everyone in your organization or in your family or in your friend group is going to be going through their reactions to the external environment and their navigation of their internal environment at different times, to different degrees and depths, with different levels of openness, and they'll be exhibiting different energies, moods, actions, reactions, words. And you need to create space to realize not everyone's going to process this the same way. The other key thing when it comes to leadership, I've noticed in crisis, is your leadership style may not match, and likely won't match, what everyone that you oversee needs from you. Some people are just going to want you to give it to them straight. They're not going to want to dwell on the feelings. Other people are going to want you to hear them. And the challenge is, how do you create space for all of that? Honor each other's boundaries and needs. Learn to articulate what you need. That's what that leading self is. Hey, what do I need as a person? What do I need in my role? How can I articulate that? And then honor when other people give that same clarity back to you. Know your limitations as a manager, a colleague, or a leader. If you're not a psychotherapist, please don't pretend to be. If you're not a crisis expert, please don't pretend to be. Or if you're going to share what you know, share it from the lens of, hey, this is my lived experience. I might not be trained, because there are some people who are being traumatized or re-traumatized in massive loss. Loss can sometimes trigger unhealed previous loss. And so we want to be aware that we might not have the resources. So explaining what you can and can't offer to the people on your team or your colleagues is really valuable. And remember, it is a long game. Ignoring your own self-care is a great way to burn out. And I don't say that from a perch of like, oh, I've seen this happen to other people. I've done this. I've ignored my own self-care, even though I go and give talks about this stuff, and I have burnt out. And it's really important to get ahead of this stuff. I've also included a few scripts because some people are like, I don't know what to say if someone wants something from me and I can't give it to them. And so you can go back and practice these or bring them with you, but it really is always getting through the point, I want to support you. Here's what I can offer you in this moment. I can listen in this moment. Here's what I can't offer you. I actually can't listen in this moment because I'm trying to process some stuff and I don't want to be unsupportive to you or me. Or I want to be there for you, but we actually have to attend to this. How can we do both? Leading organizations. Now, this is just one slide again, even though it could be a whole course at business school. The key thing here is to recognize we need to take care of our employees, our clients, and the business. Businesses need to stay going concerns. They have to stay in business. The way these aren't mutually exclusive, but they're also really not easy to balance. And like we said before, mistakes might be made. You might not agree with the things your leaders do, but hopefully they will have had experience and they will be navigating through this as best they possibly can. The ways to lead organizations through crises I've found that are successful is massive scenario planning. If this happens, then we execute on that. If this happens, we execute on that. That will require and tends to be successful if there's also massive prioritization. You can't do everything. And in crises, we tend to be reactive depending on how intense and insane things are. We have to make really clear trade-offs of the resources, time, energy, and money. Now be clear, I didn't say trade-offs of people. And that's a really important distinction because some people will personalize things. If they get laid off, a lot of people, especially if they've conflated their identity and with their role, they will take that personally. But again, a business needs to stay a going concern, so it needs to be clear about the resource trade-offs it's making. Leaders that offer clear and frequent communication tend to create certainty and stability in the system where there's so much uncertainty in the external conditions. And then also being able to have hard conversations with skillful empathy. Again, empathy is a word that's used a lot these days, but it's all about being skillful in it, not taking on too much that it debilitates you and not transgressing other people's boundaries that it violates them. Finally, I would say it's a really good time to redefine what success means for you and in your life. I gave a TED talk called Success at What Cost, all about trade-offs. And there is this amazing quote, and I'm mindful that I've gone a bit long, but I'd invite you to read it or close your eyes because I'm going to read it because I think it's really critical and captures something that's the essence of what I believe. I read this in college and it's really defined who I try to be in the world. The actor Ray Fiennes says, "The people I consider successful are so because of how they handle their responsibilities to other people, how they approach the future, people who have a full sense of the value of their life and what they want to do with it. I call people successful not because they have money or their business is doing well, but because as human beings, they have a fully developed sense of being alive and engaged in a lifetime task of collaboration with other human beings, their mothers, their fathers, their family, their friends, their loved ones, the friends who are dying, the friends who are being born. Success, it's all about being able to extend love to people, not in a big capital letter sense, but in the everyday, little by little, task by task, gesture by gesture, word by word." So with that, I thank you. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want to connect. I'll hand it back to you, Wendy.
Golbie, thank you so much. I have a whole page of notes here ready to go. And again, want to invite anybody who has questions and or reactions or thoughts to share broadly with the group, please do so in the Q&A. We will post them. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to follow up and bring us to a different place. So Sarah, it's all yours.
Thank you. All right. I am trying to start my video. Well, I'll just get started and hopefully somebody can address the video. Okay, great. Thank you. Hi there. It's good to see everybody. Golbie, thank you so much. That was really an inspiring message, and it fits so nicely into what I had hoped to share today. Particularly what struck me was this idea of the internal and the external. And I think when we're trying to achieve something, when we see something that needs to be done, when something is clear to us and we want to act on it, we need to first get grounded and pause and gain some clarity, as you so clearly articulated there. And the topic of my message is really about amplifying our voice, because when we're dealing with chaos, when we're dealing in crisis and everybody is on high alert, that means that it's really hard to be heard. So I'm going to share with you today some strategies about how to be heard amidst the chaos. And when you think about the term amplify, what does that even mean? It means to get louder, turn up the volume, but it's also more than that. It can mean to build intensity. And that's really what I'm talking about, to be thoughtful, to be strategic, and to gather cheerleaders so that others want to join us in the effort. And they can only do that if they know where we're going. So we have to be clear on that. Madeleine Albright, the former Secretary of State, has a quote. She said, "It took me quite a long time to develop a voice. And now that I have it, I am not going to be silent." So I can think of times when I had a voice, when I spoke up for a project, when I had an idea and I brought it to people and we accomplished something really meaningful. And I can also think of times when I struggled to find my voice, when I was afraid, or I wasn't sure how to explain what I thought needed to be done, or I was concerned about judgment, or sometimes I didn't think it was my place. Now, maybe that's because of the generation I grew up in, where I was frequently the only woman in an overwhelmingly male environment, and the only woman at the table if I was at the table. But eventually what I saw was that there was risk in not speaking up. There was risk in not putting forth an idea, in not showing the way. And I think once I understood that I had an obligation to speak up, not just for myself professionally, but for the people that I served. Particularly now, I really believe that silence it's a luxury we can't afford. So I'm excited to talk to you about how to stand up for what must be said. And it's beyond getting clear, getting attention in a meeting, right? Although it could be that. But how do we stand up for what we said? To me, there are really three things that this involves. It involves consideration of specific strategies that support and empower our position. It involves also thinking about who and what is this going to impact. And Golbie spoke to this so clearly, because everybody's on high alert. Everybody's looking at things from a different perspective. And that's an important thing to consider if you want to be heard. And then also, how do we attune our voice to this environment so that we can be heard? This is a really important topic for me. There was a time when I was really trying to get things done. I was really trying to have an impact. I was trying to change a culture. And I just found that I was having trouble getting people's attention. And at the time, I was working with a guy who had become a really dear friend. And he was obviously a rising star. We were paired on a couple of projects, and he just seemed to raise an idea, and all of a sudden he had the money and the staff and the funding, and people were behind him. And I watched that, and I couldn't help but notice that ideas and suggestions, proposals, it seemed like as soon as I spoke them aloud, they would die a quick death. And I feel like, as I considered that, my initial instinct was, well, maybe I just have lousy ideas, or maybe people like him better than me. He was a likable guy. But fortunately, I didn't sit there too long. I decided to ask him. And I was really lucky that my friend John had a very generous spirit. And it turned out that the reason my ideas weren't flying, my voice wasn't being heard. The reason my voice wasn't being heard was because I was missing a few key steps that he was spending a lot of time on. So it turns out that it wasn't a popularity contest, and it didn't really have anything to do with caliber of my ideas. I'm going to share with you what John taught me. And what he said was that if there is something really important, it's really important to you, something that costs money, something that is going to change people's lives, or perhaps mean that a business aspect change, and maybe some people will have more influence, and maybe some people, if your idea gets implemented, their influence will diminish. Whatever's important. And of course, I'm speaking now mostly about a work context, but I would say that the same thing is true if there's something you really want to see change in a meaningful relationship or in your household, that you really can benefit from pursuing the 5 steps that I've put here, that I sort of came to understand as I practiced more with the idea of being strategic before I opened my mouth. So first, you want to do an initial assessment. And that is to really think clearly about what this idea or proposal might be. And then identify the barriers, the objections, the reasons why people wouldn't want to move forward with this. Know those in advance, know those going in. And then really building a team of cheerleaders, allies, advocates, people who want to engage with you on this. And especially in times of chaos, it's really hard to be a lone voice. Then carefully craft your message and choose your time. So imagine that you have a great idea. You know it is a game changer. You know it's going to solve problems. It could be one of those if only ideas that if only we could do this one thing, everyone's world would be better. You feel it in your gut, you know it. Now, your first instinct might be to get so excited about the idea that you just run it up the flagpole and see if it flies. And that was kind of me. That was my instinct early on in my career, where I would just be overwhelmed with enthusiasm, and I'd put together a proposal and I'd lay it on the table, and nothing. Instead of going full steam ahead, maybe what I should have done, definitely what I should have done, is what I'm going to suggest to you here. And that is to pause and gain clarity. Write the idea down. It may seem very simple, but just writing an idea down can help you find things that need more clarity. And then write down all the possible positive outcomes of your idea. What would be the best possible thing that could happen if this idea were implemented? Now, here's something that's very, very hard. I want to suggest that at this stage, at the early stage, we need to ignore the reasons why this might be a lousy idea, for a couple of reasons. First of all, you don't want to neg yourself out and risk the chance that you just won't raise the idea because there's some issues with it. That's not fair to you. It's not fair to the people who need to hear this idea. Also, there will be a point where other people will be happy to tell you what the flaws are in your idea, and you want to give them a chance to do that. So don't assume you know yet. And then imagine that it's a year from now, and everything you wanted to happen, that if only we could do this, has happened. Make a note of what has changed. That's going to keep you energized and excited about the idea, even in the face of the objections that are kind of inevitable whenever you are suggesting change. So then ask yourself, and this is tough, what don't I know? What don't I know, for me, I don't know about you, is a really scary question sometimes. And it's tempting to avoid it because it doesn't feel good and it feels overwhelming. The whole category of, I don't know this. But if you don't ask yourself this, you will set yourself up for failure and you will lose an opportunity to gain advocates and champions for what you're trying to achieve. You really, really want to know and talk to the naysayers, the people who are going to be possibly impacted in a negative way. You want to learn from them and make adjustments and gain their support. And you can prepare yourself for this for this kind of objection barrier scenario by making a list of questions up front. What do I need to know? What is this great idea going to cost? Everybody's going to ask that, whether it's somebody you live with or the business you work with. Everybody wants to know, what's it going to cost? Whose work is going to be directly impacted, positively or negatively? I can't stress what an important consideration this is. And especially on the positive side, if you know someone's going to be positively impacted by your idea, then they become a potential advocate for you. And that's a good thing to identify up front. What other business areas might need to be considered? What can you find out around the margins that you hadn't thought of ahead of time? And how long is this going to take to integrate? Whatever your list of questions is, this is a great transition to the next step, which really is using these questions as conversation starters to begin to build your advocates, some champions for you, people who are going to want to help you. So how do we do this? You know, this seems to be a big issue. When I was talking about doing this discussion today here, I was speaking with Lynn Evans, and we were chatting about how difficult it is to move from concept to execution. And in my experience, it is this piece of gaining advocates that's the critical piece. In fact, it was the key differentiator with my friend John when it came to getting his ideas out there. I would be the person who would write the detailed proposal. It was bulletproof. It was brilliant. I got all caught up in my own writing and my idea, and I stayed very much in a vacuum while John would throw out what seemed like an off-the-cuff concept, and all of a sudden, he's been given a green light, and I'm being ignored again. And he had been building allies all the time. As much effort and work as I had been putting into my proposals, he had been putting meticulous work into building his case. And this is really important stuff. He would also find out, as I mentioned, who's going to be positively impacted. He'd get them on board ahead of time. He would take his list of questions and bring them to people. Did they have answers? So that he could sort of address those objections and ID the barriers and maybe even come up with solutions to those barriers ahead of time. He'd ask people to poke holes in his thoughts so that he would be prepared to handle the objections when he got them. And he'd ask, what am I missing? Who else should I speak with? You know, it was really a leap of faith for me to try this approach. I kind of thought if I had a great idea and I made it really clear that people should just agree with me, it should be obvious. What I didn't understand was that engaging other folks in this process is a way of getting them vested in the outcome. Relationships are really sticky things. And if you ask people to help you, if you ask people for their advice, if you ask people, what do you think? They're going to begin to want to go with you there because they are a part of the solution. You've made them a part of the process. And, you know, what I found out also that was really quite a help is that these 5 steps, you don't need to do them alone. When John and I realized we had a good thing going, we would get together and tag team on some mission we had. And each of us would take the piece that we were best at and we'd run with it. And the cool thing about that was that overnight we had 100% more support for whatever our idea was, which was not only efficient, it was also great not to be going at it alone and not to have to do all of that work. Does this take trust? It absolutely does. It absolutely does. But as I said, there's a psychology behind this. In fact, I'd recommend Robert Cialdini's book, Influence. He goes into detail on what the psychology of asking people for help is and why it's such an effective way to build coalitions so that you can be heard. You know, especially in times of crisis, it's really hard to be heard over the din. And this is an approach that has worked for me, and I hope that it works for you. There are a few other things that you do want to consider. Timing, obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning. Also the how and where of introducing your proposal. And I'd encourage you to consider who's the best person to carry your message. It may not always be you. Another thing I want to mention is that, you know, I used to think that if nothing happened when I had an idea, I used to get this voice in my head that would say, they're just not listening. And I realized a long time ago that that became a cue for, no, they haven't bought in. And that's on me. So then I'd ask more questions, learn more, and I rarely gave up. I would often raise the same idea, the same thing several times and find great success once I'd learned more and listened more. And sometimes a no isn't a no, it's not yet. So I'd encourage you to think about that as well. And with that, I'd ask, what's keeping you from using your voice, and how can I help? How can we help? I really welcome your questions and invite you to let me know. If you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, go ahead, and excited to continue the conversation. Thank you. I'm going to stop my share here.
Sarah, fabulous. Thank you so much for pushing us forward, and in part to remind us that even in this time of crisis, you know, I'm thinking about both of your presentations, even in this time of crisis, we have to manage self-care. One way to manage self-care is actually thinking about what we can do in the world. We're all grappling with that. How do we get out and do that? As we open up the questions, I want to again remind people, please do feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. We are looking forward to addressing as many of them as we can and really continuing the conversation after. I just want to start off, Golbie, I love that you put up a slide with your book recommendations, and Sarah, you put out Cialdini. I am the kind of person that I walk into someone's office and the first thing I do is I look at their bookshelf, or on Zoom, if someone's sitting in front of a bookshelf, I'm busy scanning the titles. So I was excited to see those titles. And I want to make, again, an open offer. We have about 300 of us here online, and I'm sure there's some collective wisdom of what people are listening to, what they're reading, what podcasts we're reading. So feel free to, those of you listening, really put that out there. We can all share in some collective wisdom. Golbie, I wanted to start with that, though. One thing that struck me from those titles, and some of those are some of my favorites too, is that they really reflect a new normal that says that we can have a conversation at the moment in this work world where self-care, meditation, speaking to our soul. I was listening yesterday to a podcast by Lynn Twist, The Soul of Money. We can talk about the financial system in terms of the soul of it, that we're really, my experience is that is more welcome into the workplace at the moment. And I wanted to sort of start with, is that your experience? And if so, or if not, how can people really bring that conversation of our soul and sort of the depths of our values and beliefs to a work world that has been opening to that, I think, but really is sanitized from that a lot? Like, how do we, in this new normal, welcome that into the conversation more?
That's a fantastic question, and I'm smiling because I've worked at two companies that have cultures that are in many ways at different ends of the spectrum. One's more institutional, traditional, and one, financial services, conservative in many ways. And one is startup, scale up tech. And I was based in San Francisco, which is a bit more progressive in terms of how we look at culture and how we look at organizations. I would say the first part of your question, it is shifting and it is opening up. And some industries, some companies, some leaders are more open to it than others. The fact that BlackRock in 2013 was willing to support our vice chair, who had been the head of the Swiss National Bank, was the executive sponsor of the program that I created. And the fact that the senior leadership was willing to get behind something that many thought was super woo-woo was a sign that things are shifting. Yeah. And some people are more willing, maybe because of their personal experience, to dive into that realm. So I do think things are shifting, but the key is really how broadly does it impact, and how much depth of impact does it have?
Yeah.
The second part of your question, remind me one more time.
I mean, I think, in part, I think what you're reflecting on is that it partially depends on the culture of your workplace. I know there's a lot of people online that get to craft the culture of their workplace, or at least the culture of their teams, if not the whole workplace. And some of the questions that I saw online were in part around, how do I do that to bring in more of people's reality, holisticness, especially, someone was asking, especially if I know that my team is going through some mental health challenges. So right. What do I do to both address that and have boundaries, I think, which is part of the message.
Right. That's the $1 million question, right? And I've been spending decades of my career trying to figure that out. I think, honestly, my mindset is that it always starts with you. People have heard me say it's an inside job. And to figure out, okay, well, what can I learn from this situation? And how can I use that to change my mindset, my attitudes, how I show up in the world. Because ultimately, I think leaders have the greatest impact simply by how they show up. Now, under extreme stress, we don't always show up the way we might aspire to, or the way we might if our nervous system's in regulation. So in these crisis moments is a hard time to kind of be your best self. Some people are just trying to take a shower during the day, like if we're being real, right?
With our kids in the room, right? So
No, it's complicated.
Yeah.
So I think the key is start with your own self-care, and like the humanity about a national crisis or a global crisis is that you can really relate. Like, what if your parent got sick? What if you lose your job? Like, you have feelings and thoughts. Think about what you might want to hear or experience. And then to the extent you're capable, show up and reflect that to the people around you. And if you're not capable, to have that boundary. That it is tricky when we get to mental health issues, because again, I'm a firm believer in, if you're managers knowing their boundaries and their power dynamics, and it's complex. So you don't necessarily want to transgress into another person's kind of well-being. So it's about working with them to find the resources that allow them to feel supported, all the while doing what you need to feel supported, and not neglecting your own self-care, but letting actually what you do for yourself reflect back to the people that are on your team.
Yeah, and inviting them to do the same. I mean, in some ways, role modeling, it invites them to do the same. And in some ways, is more expansive. Like on some basic level, just be human. And I'm thinking about that, Sarah, in terms of the advice that you were giving for reaching out and having voice. In part, I'm thinking about, again, it seems to me that there's real depth in the potential for our own self-care. For some of us, putting ourselves out there and having our voice heard is a self-care mechanism.
It is.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet, how do we advocate when others, or build advocates when others are really, we don't know what challenges they're going through. How do we do it at this moment? And we're not sure what our bosses are going through. We're not sure what our subordinates are going through. How do we navigate having voice while being sensitive to the fact that some people are just struggling to take a shower at home?
Sure, absolutely. It's such a great question. And to me, my mind went immediately to sort of it seems like a simple answer, but what I find is helpful when I'm on the receiving end is when somebody asks me how I'm doing, I try to give them an honest answer.
Yeah.
And so what I think that in even around my house right now, the simple respect of would now be a good time to talk, right? Or how are things going for you? Being sensitive and assuming that somebody's fighting a battle you don't know about. But asking first, before you ask for anything, asking first, how are you doing? And being really attentive to the process. And I know in business, it can be very frustrating, when people get so caught up in the process and let's just take action, let's just do stuff. This is not the time.
Yeah.
This is not the time. And people will remember your kindness.
Yeah.
If you are respectful now, and they will, I think, at least in my experience, they will want to be with you and engage with you and support you if they know that you care about how they're doing.
Yeah.
And this goes for everybody. This goes for everybody, whether it's a work issue or that something happening at home. In terms of self-care, I'll give you a really concrete example. I have an unusual number of people in my house right now.
Yeah.
And I needed to send out a message that I needed absolute silence this morning.
Yeah.
Right? So I tried to engage and enroll the entire family on what was going on with me this morning and be respectful and know that, somebody I live with is normally up until 2 a.m. and they're not going to have a problem. Someone else I live with is going to be up at 5:30 and bouncing around at about the time that we were scheduled to get online. So I don't know if that's helpful to people, but I think simple kindness goes a long way right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Golbie, it looks like were you gonna address that as well?
I think I think you mentioned something about just sharing what we're doing and learning from each other. Mm-hmm. And I was going to say, again, it's helpful to recognize that leaders are people, meaning they might be a leader with an expanded role or responsibility in a system, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily know how to do global pandemic any better than anyone else. And I've always told my teams, like, there's no monopoly on good ideas. And just because someone in an organizational system might have more power or a bigger role and responsibilities doesn't mean they've figured out life or they're any more wise, or, they just, in that system might value what they're bringing to the table at that point slightly more, or by giving them more role and responsibility. And so I've learned so much from the people on my team who have showed me ways to do things better. And I hopefully can do the same. And so I think it's this really concept of, again, my teams will have heard me say this in the past, we each have something to teach and we each have something to learn. Yeah. And this interdependency of the entire planet now, but especially an organization, is showing up more and more and realizing, hey, I might be the final decision maker on this, or I might have context that I can't share with you, or I have and don't have time to share, but you are absolutely valuable in helping me see how I can better self-care, how I can better lead you, how I can better lead others or lead the organization. So it's that constant conversation.
Yeah, I love that. I want to push us to turn to some questions that were resonant in the Q&A and in the chat. And it really resonated with me. So this notion of self-care and other care, of knowing yourself and then having voice to others, like, there's a real tension in that, being able to create the boundaries or the balancing. And it resonated with me, those of you that were with us last week, it's this both and, right? We've got to sort of be in this constant balancing. And so last week I shared, for me, like, the both and of self and other, work and life, is my husband and I have just said, okay, like, one day on, one day off, and we're squeezing a hell of a lot of work into half as much time, and not everybody can do that. But I guess I wanted to put out there, like, ways to unpack, like, in the micro actions, in the moment, this sort of navigating of boundaries, of balancing the self-other that work for both of you. Do
you want to go for that first, Sarah?
Sure. I think for me, it's routine, and it's getting everyone to sort of just sharing my routine and encouraging, I guess, getting others to encourage me to stick to my routine. Yeah. So I think most of us, if we pause and take a moment, we know what makes us feel good. We know the habits. We know the schedule. We know the stuff that is comforting. And I found, talk about, not knowing how to do a pandemic, Golbie. I found that I was abandoning my routine in the early days, and it was having an impact. It was not having a good impact. And so as soon as I caught that, and I got everybody on board with helping me stick to my routine, I did a lot better. And I think it's valuable to consider, what are your go-to feel good, take care of myself? And then also to be open to the point of boundaries and thinking of others. You've got to respect others. Whatever their feel good thing is, don't make that the thing you can't put up with.
Yeah.
Because everybody's doing their best in a difficult situation.
Yeah.
I'll chime in if it's helpful just before we wrap. I think I totally agree with Sarah on routines. Routines can be hugely helpful. The challenge is, again, depending on what you're experiencing and the external conditions or the internal conditions, your life might be chaos right now, and it might not be conducive to any routine. And so I think one of the ways, especially if you're meant to be in a leadership or a caretaking as a parent, for example, position, where we tend to neglect because there's so many other people who might be more vulnerable or dependent on us. Yeah. And I've been in that scenario so many times where I have actually been completely under-resourced as a person internally, but other people don't know that because I haven't told them, and I'm meant to be taking care. And that's a great way to burn out. Yeah. The way to kind of get ahead of that is in the moments when you are calm, in the moments, which hopefully we all have every day, at least for a moment, to do that same leading organizations scenario planning for your own life. To be like, okay, I might have a scenario where I don't want to get to work, or I haven't showered, or I'm exasperated, or I'm exhausted. Why isn't my boss asking me how I'm doing? Why am I supposed to ask my directs how they're doing? And you come up with the scenario. Okay, in that instance, I'm going to take 3 deep breaths. And then I'm going to realize that right after I get off the call with my directs, I'm going to go make a cup of tea. And whatever, it could be really tactical. But if you actually can anticipate the scenarios where you might feel under-resourced but have to give, or you might have to give in a way that you're not comfortable with, and you get ahead of it, then you really can you can use those scripts that I put in the slides. You can create your own scripts so that you, again, you expect the unexpected, but you aren't unprepared.
Yeah, I love those scripts, and we will, to those who are on the call, we will send out those slides so that you can indeed stand in the mirror and practice very specifically those scripts. Sarah, I just want to say I love what you said, because or I love what you both said. And Sarah, when I was thinking about, we all have different routines, and honoring those differences is also really, what resonated for me is that, for me, my routine is let me hunker down and get stuff done. And my husband's routine is like, let me hunker down and let go of everything and just sit in front of the TV and like listen to the news. And part of, I think, the patience in this moment is knowing that that's different in our homes, and also knowing that that's different broadly. We have about 1 minute left. So I want to throw out $1 million questions for like really a very short response, which is, any thoughts on how our new reality of how we manage in this bubble crisis will bleed into and hopefully open up in the workplace? I get it, it's a big question, but any quick thoughts on how it will change as we go back into a broader reality?
I would say, I think for some people, it's going to be life altering. For some people, for some businesses, for some companies, some industries, and for others, it might not have an impact. I remember New York City after September 11th. It was all anything, it changed the city. And then I flew to San Francisco 2 weeks after it had happened. And people weren't even talking about it, on the Stanford campus. And I thought, New York City has fundamentally changed and cannot stop talking about this for years. Yeah. And San Francisco, at least my cohort there, wasn't registering. So I think we're going to see a variety of reactions, long-term reactions to this.
Yeah. Sarah.
From my view, I want to say that I think this is an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways it is up to us. It is up to the people who are on this call to decide What do we want that to look like? We do not need to go back to whatever normal was. We have an amazing opportunity to create what we want normal, the new normal, what we want that to look like.
Yeah.
I am sure that there's not a single person with us this morning who doesn't have some ideas already about that. And I would just encourage us all to use our voices to make that happen, because it's in our hands.
Sarah, I love that. I love that as a final point, a call to action. It resonates with where Golbie left us of redefining our own success as well as our collective success. And so with that, I want to say thank you to everybody. I want to say thank you to Sarah and to Golbie for some wonderful insight. Thank you to all of you for being here as part of this community. And we hope that you will continue to be in conversation with us at the Women's Leadership Initiative. We have 4 more of these webinars set up, and we'll continue to think about how to expand this going forward. So please do join us. And again, thank you everyone for a great conversation this morning. Hope you are off to redefine success and be powerful and grounded. Thank you.